Hey guys, it's Andy, and I took my 20-30 minute lecture and tried to boil it down into a 7-minute walkthrough for our first project. Again, the goal of the first project is simply getting used to codepen and CSS and simple HTML. Now, the codepen editor is going to be our main tool. What's nice about it is how fast and flexible it makes it to concentrate just on the essentials of learning HTML and CSS and JavaScript when we get to it. So you can use the change view button here in the editor to set up an environment comfortable for you. The point is the live preview, which is tied to the code you type, is in the split screen view. Now be sure when you create any project, you initially give it a name and save it. It's possible, because you're in the cloud, to create something and forget to save it. Now the HTML panel, as you guys are used to, an HTML document has both a head and a body. But in CodePen, we don't need all of this extra code. This is actually being done behind the scenes. We're essentially just going to focus on the content of our page, or what's between the body tags. In this HTML panel, when you type, just understand that you're already inside of a set of body tags. This makes it keeps it real clean and simple. Same with the CSS. It's actually going to be an externally linked style sheet, but that's done behind the scenes for you. Save often. But I should mention that you can still style the body tag even though it's not explicitly listed up there in the HTML panel. So the goal here is really getting used to CSS. The properties are well defined, like background, hyphen, color, but you'll notice that as you learn, there's lots of different ways to describe values for color, for example. It could be hex, or it could be a named color, or RGB. By the way, RGBA is probably the one we use all the time because it has this extra property, alpha, or opacity, which is measured 0 to 100%, which is typed 0 to 1. So if you want 50%, you type in 0.5. But again, our project is to sort of I'm creating a mock-up of a quote. I chose this keep calm and carry on quote. It's a dark red document with white text and, a couple of different sizes of type there. I'm going to use named colors. It just makes it simple. There's a bunch of web pages if you Google, but this is a great one where you can find out what all the weird names are that match up to specific colors. So we have a dark red body and white text. Now, HTML can be super clean and very simple. It has nothing to do with design, nothing to do with style. It's only the logic or semantic hierarchy of your content. Now, in the case of our poster, it's still just one line of text. What Google should see is one complete phrase, keep calm and carry on. But you'll notice in the design it has, well, a graphic icon, and it has some bold areas. We have semantic tools for that. We can have a single paragraph, but strongly say or emphasize keep calm, and the word and again emphasize the carry on part at the end. Now what Google sees, as you can see there in the preview, Google just sees some bold text in a single line. That's a clue that we've said the right thing. We don't have three things, we just have one. We will use CSS to style it, and by setting a reset, which you can do under the gear button. We talked about that in class. The reset allows you to zero out all styling. So every piece of the design is up to you. The color, the font size, we can even make it uppercase or change to Gill Sans. One note there. The safest way to use fonts that everybody can see is to use web fonts. Google Fonts is one place where you can find a ton of these. CodePen makes it easy to use it in your CSS directly. I've posted a link to how to do this, but let's pick this font in a medium format. Now you can put this in JavaScript, HTML, or CSS. I'm going to use the second tab, Import, and just copy and paste this line that Google gives you as the very first line of your CSS. In a sense, that's installing the font. Then you can see the name of it there, that sort of strange string of code. You can access that font simply by typing in font family, or font hyphen family, and that name in quotations. Now we have the catamaran font being pulled dynamically from Google Fonts. Again, because we isolated those strong elements, it's important to understand that that's how we create design. We can make the font size large. Leading is called line height, and that can be adjusted. Again, typically 1 is normal. Anything smaller than 1 is tight leading. Anything bigger than 1 is loose leading. I think this 0.8 looks pretty good. Now, the design is centered, and just like you would center text, that's trivial to do with CSS. And I'm going to cheat here and just pay attention to the width of my document. About 480 is where it stacks upright. So I'm going to lock the body of my document to be no wider than 480 pixels, and that sort of keeps the flow of this. Well, let's talk about that crown. I want to show you a weird trick here. There are lots of ways to select things in CSS. That's the game you're playing. The selector, the part that comes before the squiggly brace, is trying to define exactly what it is you're trying to get. Now this first letter one is a little bizarre. It would make more sense to, just like we did with the strong, isolate the element. And there's a generic element, generic inline element called a span. Wrapping the first letter in a span and changing the selector to span allows us to access it just like any other object. And we can switch between inline and block to make it stack up on top just by changing its display value. Spans by default, like strong and emphasis, are inline elements. Finally, there are characters that you can't normally type, copyright symbol, registration symbol, and they all have this sort of weird format where between an ampersand and a semicolon you type in some key code. Here's a way to cheat with that crown. Chess pieces are part of every font, so it's a weird number, but we can find that what's known as an HTML entity and basically insert that as the first letter, if you will, or the first span of our document. Now, as a block level element, how do we control it looking like an image? Well, here's a trick I like to use. The outline property just lets you draw a box around the element. Margin is the space that keeps elements away from each other. So if the span has a bottom margin, it will push the rest of the text further down the page. So margin bottom, I'm going to set it to 50 pixels, remove the outline, is an easy way to sort of start to create layout, craft it. We'll get into a lot more detail with crafting layout and positioning elements. So for this exercise, just grab a quote, try to bring it to life with some interesting typography, maybe play around with colors and see what you can get.